Asmongold revealed his biggest problems with New World, and I just want to take a minute to address them, if you will. So Asmongold, at the end of his stream, just last night at the time of recording, basically very casually sort of went through his New World issues that were its biggest problems. Now, this was like the chill end of a stream, so don't get your knickers in a twist. I don't think he was necessarily like going through it in great detail, but the man is obviously very intelligent and knows his stuff when it comes to MMOs, so I just wanted to look through them. The problems that he listed before he sort of finished his list are these. The servers are too small and they should combine all or most servers. There's time wasting mechanics for no reason. Taxes, because nobody likes paying taxes, and you can't inspect people. Okay? Given more time, he may have gone further, but let's just address these ones. And I want to start with probably the least important first in my eyes, which is the fact that you can't inspect people. Number one, I think inspecting people comes with some disadvantages as well as advantages, and there's a query there whether or not you'd even want it in a game. However, in the July patch, it does seem that we are going to be able to inspect people. Now, it's not in the PTR just yet, but it is in the patch notes. You're going to be able to see gear score, weapon mastery. I don't think you're necessarily going to see exactly what gear people have, but hopefully that would satisfy, well, Asmongold. But the rest of the issues that he mentions, I do think are actual serious problems with the game. Server size, for example, let's face it, is pretty unfortunate. There is a little bit of a problem there that if they actually made the server capacity like 5,000, then that would cause issues in different ways. For one reason, you probably wouldn't be able to do any wars because they would be so competitive, because the map is relatively small and there's so few zones that even being on a 2,000 populated server, it's actually quite difficult to get in a war because getting the declaration becomes quite troublesome. So there's an actual like gameplay mechanic reason that if you went much bigger, it probably wouldn't work right now. Now, obviously, when we get a new zone, that will improve things a little bit because in theory, you'll now be able to take that zone and, you know, that makes more wars possible. There's also the caveat here that actually on a 2,000 person server, sometimes the server can get pretty laggy, especially during wars. However, that is apparently getting fixed because wars are going on their own server and that should help with the server lag. But if you were ever doing chest runs and you're in a big clump, then you'll know how laggy a server can truly get. So whilst it would be great to have bigger servers and it would stop the issue of dying servers, unfortunately I think essentially the technology that's used in New World isn't really capable of it right now, as well as the world itself not really being great for a lot of people. Right now, I think a server is probably best between somewhere like 800 and 1,500 people. If you go much lower than that, then you can't get queue pops and that kind of thing. And if you go higher than that, then one, you can't log in sometimes, and two, you can't get in the wars, etc. Now, one thing that I do think will help with this is cross-realm. We know cross-realm is coming at some point, and cross-realm will definitely sort a lot of the issues with dying servers, because yes, you don't want to be on a dead server, but if you're on a dead server and you can still do outpost Russian arena and stuff like that, you won't be as affected by it as you would be right now. So for me, server size is still an issue, but I'm hoping it will get softened over time. Now, the next category is the time wasting mechanisms for no reason. Well, I think there's two things there, and I'm not 100% sure which Asmongold here is trying to comment. Maybe he's commenting on both of them. One of them, I think, is effectively expertise or the high watermark gear score, and I think it's probably that which he means, but there's also the issue of time gating. So let's start with time wasting, and I think that's the expertise system. As I said, this was a system that basically slowed you down in getting the gear that you would want. So basically, if you hit level 60, your expertise starts off as 500 and you want to start getting your watermark up or your expertise up, and that'll then mean that you can get higher quality loot. Once you get all the way to 600, you then have the best chance of getting the best loot. I agree that this system is bad and it sort of does waste your time, and I personally would just like to see expertise flat out removed. And I think you could actually remove it from the live game right now and nobody would miss it, because what Amazon could do, anybody who just hits level 60, your expertise is just automatically 600. Like, they could do it and it would be a nice little catch up, so you don't have to go through that grind before you go through the grind of getting your Umbral shards and increasing your gear score to 625. I sort of understand what this system was designed to do. They sort of wanted you to do a variety of different endgame content to sort of slow you down and get you to not get to the max power instantly. You know, they didn't want to make it so that you could do the expeditions, get the high-end gear and call it a day. They didn't want to make it, even though they actually did, so that you could craft your gear at 600 and have the most powerful gear straight away. So they tried to slow you down and effectively waste your time. But once you got to gear score 600, you were effectively doing the same content, but now you were doing it again to get the powerful stuff. Overall, it simply wasted your time, and I think it's a bad system. Like, a lot of MMOs will have like gear scores or item levels, but a lot of MMOs then don't have it so that you have to sort of grind that out without getting the associated power. So what I mean by that is, generally you get the gear that makes it easier to do harder content. You don't get a score that makes it easier for you to get better gear, and then you get the gear to do harder content. I don't know if that made sense, but basically I would just like to have seen a progression system in New World when it came to gear. Like, maybe you hit level 60 and then you go farm level 60 mobs and you get like 520 gear. Then you go into your first expedition and that takes you up to 550. Then you go into a harder expedition and that takes you up to 570, and so on and so forth, right? Obviously in other games you generally have different types of content in terms of like dungeons and then raids and other kinds of content where it sort of gets harder. New World didn't really have that until we got the mutations, and then the mutations are sort of a different system from the expertise anyway. Like, I won't go on about it, but effectively I don't think the progression should have been the way that we have it now with the high watermark gear score system. I think it's dog poop basically. However, if you removed it from when everybody hit level 60, it would have caused a different kind of issue. The game wasn't designed with not having the expertise system in place, and that's a problem they can address, but they can't address it now. They'll have to address that in like an expansion. What they could do now is say, hey, we realize that the expertise system is not really doing much right now, so we're just going to remove it. Like, I'd be happy to see it gone. Now, the next thing that it could have been is time gating. Now, I think a lot of time gates have been softened in New World. Firstly, expedition orbs are actually just getting removed and replaced with a time gate, but we'll come to that in a second. But those expedition orbs were time gated quite harshly at first because you had to craft them, and the crafting was on a cooldown. Then they made it so that you can buy them from the faction store, and that meant so you had multiple ways of getting them, so that softened the time gate. Then they reduced the time on that basically, so it was relatively easy to get the expedition orbs, and the time gate wasn't really relevant, right? But then they went ahead and introduced a time gate on PvP arenas for the rewards, and quite frankly, we're a little bit fed up of time gates. Now, expeditions in the July patch are actually getting changed, so you'll be able to do 50 normal expeditions, and I think it's going to be 25 mutated expeditions a week. Now, it's 20 in the patch notes, but I saw 25 on the forums. I'm not going to cite my source on this one, so get over it. Now, the amount of people who are running 25 mutated expeditions or more apparently is less than 5%, so 95% of players will not be affected by this change. And a bit of me thinks, well, if you're going to not affect that many people, you could just remove the time gates full stop. Now, I think they're keeping them simply so they stop like boost sellers, but a bit of me sort of thinks they could have done that a different way. I just think with the expedition ores, with the PvP and probably other time gates, people are just a little bit fed up with time gates in New World and mostly should be removed. Even though they have strongly been softened, I would like to see them just gone, just so we can get over it and move on with our lives. I especially think that if you're not going to remove expertise, then the expertise gypsum cast should definitely be flat out removed right now as a time gate. Like, you should just be able to do it as often as you like, as quickly as you like, so that you can get your expertise to 600 quickly and then slow people down getting the umbral shards. That's what I would personally do. Okay, and the next issue that he mentions is taxes, and in brackets, nobody likes to pay taxes, right? And on this one, again, I think there's sort of two things at play here. One is the way that I think was probably meant in terms of just like paying your housing tax. But the second, I actually think is one of the worst things in the game, and I'll explain what I'm talking about in a second. Firstly, paying for your housing tax when the game first came out was something like 1,000 gold every 5 days for the biggest house. That was an absolute shed ton of money, and it just felt really bad to do that to just enjoy the game. Paying tax was never fun, and it felt really bad. Now, this has been softened to a very, very like great degree. The most expensive house now costs maybe like 100 gold every 7 days, and you can get that gold easily by running out post rush or doing an expedition, right? So the amount of tax that you noticeably pay is now quite small. You still pay tax when you craft and that kind of thing, and that's still a pain, but you don't really notice it or feel it as much, right? So I'm going to give this one essentially effectively a pass. Now, where I think it's actually one of the worst things in the game is that you are basically taking money from the poor people and giving it to the rich people. So the people who are good at wars and they win territories, they get an absolutely shed ton of gold, and whilst they should be rewarded, I think the amount of gold that they get is absolutely insane, and it's way too much, and you're literally taking that gold from everybody else on the server. Now, I'm not going to go into more detail because I've made videos about that in the past. You can agree with me or disagree with me or whatever, it doesn't matter. I think for casual players though, it just just feels bad because you feel like you can't compete with those ultra competitive players. So that's my thoughts on that one. So overall, I think Asmongold is pretty right. I think these issues are some of the biggest issues that New World has faced. Probably excluding the inspecting one, I don't think that's really in the same league. I think there's quite a few other big issues that New World has that they need to address, which I'm not going to talk about here. But I wanted to address these as I said, Asmongold is pretty knowledgeable about MMOs. His experience is quite vast. But I wanted to talk about these issues specifically because if you're somebody who like watches Asmongold, or maybe you just think the way as he does, and these are issues that you said, oh, I'm not going to come back, well, maybe it's worth reconsidering because a lot of them have sort of been tweaked that they're not as relevant. Yes, the server size is still going to be an issue until we get cross-realm. Time gating is still a thing, but time wasting is made easier because I never actually mentioned this, but actually getting your expertise up is getting easier and easier over time. The tax that an average player spends is a lot less noticeable now. It's a like way smaller amount of your overall gold. And if inspecting was the big issue for you, well, we think that's coming to some extent. So a lot of these issues are sort of addressed, but sort of still existing. And I would like to see Amazon take a look at them and see if we can go even further on them personally. And I actually think that maybe if Asmongold really wanted to dedicate his time to it and like fully critique the game again, we would get a bigger list of things that could be improved. But there's no onus on him to do that, like unless Amazon wanted to pay him, I guess. Well, maybe Amazon are indirectly paying him because of Twitch, but I don't really know his finances, so I'm not going to speculate. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on this. Have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, do consider becoming a member. It really would help. Have a most beautiful day. Goodbye.